The bankrupt Arab millionaire let the young beggar woman sleep the night in his office. But the next day he was shocked by what he saw when he opened the door. The bitter December wind howled through the concrete canyons of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the last remnants of a day Hassan al-Rashid would rather forget. At 45, the owner of al-Rashid and Associates stood before the impressive glass facade of his law firm's building, his reflection a stark reminder of how much had changed in the past year. His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the weight of responsibility bearing down on his shoulders. The latest client meeting had been particularly difficult. Another long-standing corporation threatening to take their business elsewhere, swayed by the whispers and rumors that had been circulating about his firm. Hassan ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, exhaustion etched across his face. The legacy his father had built over 3 decades was slipping through his fingers like sand. 20 years ago, when Kamal al-Rashid had handed over the reins of the firm to his son, it had been Chicago's crown jewel of corporate law. Now Hassan watched as contract after contract disappeared, pulled away by a tide of carefully orchestrated attacks on the firm's reputation. He knew exactly who was behind it all: Marcus Sterling, his father's former partner turned bitter rival. Lost in thought, Hassan almost missed the small figure huddled in the building's alcove. A young woman, no more than 25, was attempting to shelter from the wind, her thin jacket providing little protection against Chicago's notorious winter. Their eyes met briefly before she quickly looked away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Something about her struck Hassan. Perhaps it was the way she clutched a worn book to her chest, or how she tried to maintain dignity despite her circumstances. In that moment, he saw something of himself, of the determination his father had always praised in him. "Miss?" he called out, surprising himself. "Are you all right?" The young woman looked up, wariness evident in her bright green eyes. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, her voice carrying an unexpected note of refinement. "Just waiting for the shelter to open." Hassan glanced at his watch. It was nearly midnight. "Which shelter?" "St. Mary's," she answered, then added with a hint of resignation. "But they're probably full by now." Hassan found himself walking closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite explain. The security guard inside the building watched with interest as Hassan engaged in conversation with this unexpected visitor. "I'm Hassan al-Rashid," he introduced himself, noting how she straightened slightly at his formal tone. "And you are?" "Sarah," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Sarah Mitchell." Hassan noticed the book she was holding, a worn copy of Constitutional Law, Principles and Policies. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're interested in law?" Sarah's grip on the book tightened. I used to study it. Before..." She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. The wind picked up, and Sarah shivered involuntarily. Hassan made a decision that would alter both their lives forever, though he didn't know it at the time. "Miss Mitchell, I have a proposition for you. This building has a vacant office on the 3rd floor. It's warm, safe, and you're welcome to use it tonight." Sarah's eyes widened with suspicion. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Hassan replied, thinking of his father's words about opportunity and responsibility. "Sometimes people just need a chance. The security guard, Mr. Rodriguez, will be here all night. You'll be safe." Sarah studied his face intently, weighing his offer against years of learned caution. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. al-Rashid." As Hassan watched Mr. Rodriguez escort Sarah to the elevator, his phone buzzed with another crisis demanding his attention. The firm's biggest client was threatening to pull their accounts by the end of the week. In the lobby's reflection, Hassan saw his father's portrait watching over him, and for the first time that day he felt a glimmer of hope. Sometimes the smallest decisions could lead to the biggest changes. What he didn't notice was the dark, sedan parked across the street, its occupant taking careful notes about this unexpected interaction. Marcus Sterling's network of informants never rested, and this unusual scene would soon make its way back to the man determined to destroy the al-Rashid legacy. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. Elena Martinez adjusted her badge in the elevator, mirror of the Chicago Public Integrity Bureau. steeling herself for another day of pushing against the boundaries of what her superiors considered necessary investigation. At 35, she had earned a reputation as one of the Bureau's most tenacious investigators, even if that same determination often put her at odds with the political machinery that ran the city. Today's target was the growing number of complaints against Al-Rashid and Associates, one of Chicago's oldest and most respected law firms. On paper, it looked like a straightforward case of a once great institution falling from grace, but something about the pattern of accusations nagged at Elena's investigative instincts. The elevator doors opened to reveal James Chen, the youngest, partner at Al-Rashid and Associates, waiting in the Bureau's lobby. At 32, he carried himself with the confident air of someone who had earned his position through merit rather than connections. Elena had requested this meeting, but she hadn't expected him to arrive so promptly. "Inspector Martinez," James extended his hand, his smile professional but guarded. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Elena led him to a small conference room, noting how his eyes scanned the room with a lawyer's attention to detail. "Mr. Chen, I've been reviewing the recent complaints against your firm. There's a pattern that seems orchestrated." James's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We've had our suspicions, but proving it has been challenging. Our clients are being approached with very specific information, details that should have been confidential." Elena spread out several files on the table between them, like the Watson manufacturing contract. "The complaint filed against your firm came just days before they announced they were switching to Sterling Legal Services." "Marcus Sterling," James said the name with barely concealed contempt. "He was Mr. Al-Rashid's partner 20 years ago. The split wasn't amicable." Eleanor leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Tell me about the split." James hesitated, loosening his tie slightly. "It's mostly before my time, but there were rumors. Sterling wanted to take the firm in a different direction, more aggressive, less concerned with ethics. Kamal al-Rashid, Hassan's father, refused. Shortly after, Sterling left to start his own firm, taking several major clients with him. And now he's systematically targeting your remaining clients," Elena concluded, making notes in her tablet. "But why now, after all these years?" James's response was interrupted by Elena's phone buzzing with an urgent message. Her supervisor wanted to see her immediately. She apologized to James, but before he could leave, she had one more question. "Mr. Chen, would you be willing to meet again? Perhaps somewhere less official?" James studied her for a moment before nodding. "There's a cafe on Michigan Avenue, the Blue Door. Tomorrow at 7? Eleanor agreed, watching as he left the conference room. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, something that connected all the pieces of this puzzle. In her supervisor's office, the conversation went exactly as she'd feared. "Drop the Al-Rashid investigation," Director Thompson ordered, not even looking up from his computer. "It's a waste of resources." "Sir, there's clear evidence of coordinated..." "Her attacks on their reputation," Elena protested. "This goes beyond normal business competition." Thompson finally looked at her, his expression hard. "That's not your concern, Inspector. Focus on cases that matter." As Elena left the office, her determination only grew stronger. She'd seen this before, pressure from above to ignore certain investigations, particularly when they threatened powerful interests. But something about this case felt different, more personal. What Elena didn't know was that at that very moment, in the Al-Rashid building across town, a young woman named Sarah was about to discover something in the firm's archives that would change everything. Sometimes the truth had a way of emerging from the most unexpected places. Chapter 3: Hidden Talents. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the third-floor office, where Sarah Mitchell sat surrounded by stacks of old case files. What had started as a single night's shelter had somehow stretched into a week, with Hassan's tacit permission. Every morning she expected someone to tell her to leave, but instead she found herself drawn deeper into the fascinating world of Al-Rashid and Associates. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of a particularly dusty file from 15 years ago. Her legal studies, though interrupted by circumstances beyond her control, had given her an eye for detail that proved invaluable as she organized the firm's archived cases. It was therapeutic work, allowing her mind to focus on something other than the harsh realities that had led her to the streets. A gentle knock on the doorframe startled her. Hassan stood there, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since their first encounter. "Good morning, Sarah. I trust you slept well?" Sarah nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the makeshift bed she'd created from office furniture. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I've been meaning to thank you properly, and to explain—" Hassan held up a hand, his expression kind but professional. "No explanations necessary, not yet, but I do have a question for you." He gestured to the organized stacks of files around her. "I've noticed you've been going through our archives. Any particular reason?" Sarah hesitated, then reached for a file she'd set aside. "Actually, yes. I found something interesting about the Watson manufacturing case. The complaint filed against your firm? It mirrors almost exactly a case from 15 years ago against a completely different company." Hassan's eyebrows rose as he took the file, scanning its contents. Sarah continued, her voice growing more confident. "The language, the specific allegations, they're practically identical. It's as if someone used this old case as a template, changing just enough details to make it look new." "This is remarkable work," Hassan said slowly, his mind racing with the implications. "Would you be willing to look for similar patterns in other recent complaints?" Sarah's eyes lit up with purpose. "I already have." She pulled out several more files, spreading them across the desk. "There's a pattern, Mr. Al-Rashid. These attacks on your firm, they're not random. Someone's been studying your old cases, using them as blueprints for their accusations." Hassan sat down heavily in a nearby chair, his expression thoughtful. "Call me Hassan," he said finally. "And how would you like a job, Miss Mitchell? A real one with a proper salary and benefits?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the desk. I don't have a current address, or proper clothes, or—" "We can solve those problems," Hassan assured her. "What I need is your mind, your attention to detail. This discovery of yours, it could be exactly what we need to fight back." Before Sarah could respond, James Chen appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Hassan, we have a situation. Sterling's firm just filed an ethics complaint against us with the State Bar Association. They're claiming we've been fabricating evidence." Hassan's face darkened, but Sarah spoke up before he could respond. "Wait, the timing of this can't be a coincidence. Just as we find evidence of their pattern, they accuse us of fabrication." James looked at Sarah with new interest, then at the files spread across the desk. "What evidence?" As Sarah explained her discoveries, James began taking notes on his tablet, his expression growing more animated. "This is exactly what Inspector Martinez was looking for, a pattern of coordinated attacks." Hassan stood, straightening his tie with renewed determination. "James, contact Inspector Martinez immediately. Sarah, I need you to prepare a detailed analysis of everything you've found, and I mean everything. Dates, patterns, similarities." "What are you going to do?" James asked. "I'm going to call an emergency partners meeting," Hassan replied, a hint of his father's steel entering his voice. "It's time we stopped playing defense. Marcus Sterling wants a war. Let's show him we know how to fight back." As Hassan and James left the office, Sarah looked around at the scattered files with new purpose. For the first time in years, she felt truly useful, truly needed. The street-smart instincts that had kept her alive were now serving a greater purpose, helping to unravel a conspiracy that threatened to destroy not just a law firm, but the legacy of a family that had shown her unprecedented kindness. What none of them realized was that Sarah's discovery was just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden in those dusty archives lay a secret that would shake the foundations of both firms, a truth that Marcus Sterling had spent 20 years trying to keep buried. Chapter 4. Dangerous Connections. The Blue Door Cafe hummed with the evening. Crouched as Eleanor Martinez stirred her cooling coffee, her mind racing with the implications of what James Chen had just shared. Sarah Mitchell's discoveries in the archives had provided the missing piece she'd been searching for, proof of a coordinated campaign against Al-Rashid and associates. "So this Sarah," Elena said, studying James's face carefully, "she just happened to find these patterns in your old cases?" James leaned forward, his voice low but intense. I know how it sounds, but you should see her work. It's incredible. She has this way of connecting dots that everyone else missed. Hassan's already hired her officially. Elena made a note to interview Sarah herself, and the timing of Sterling's ethics complaint. Too perfect to be coincidence, James replied, running a hand through his dark hair. He must have somehow found out we were onto his pattern. The question is how. Before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message made her blood run cold. Drop the Al-Rashid case. Final warning. James noticed her expression change. What is it? Elena showed him the message, watching as his lawyer's mind processed the implications. This isn't the first warning, is it? He asked quietly. No, Elena admitted. My supervisor's been pressuring me to drop the investigation for weeks. But this, she gestured to the phone, this is new. You should be careful, James said, concern evident in his voice. Sterling has connections throughout the city, powerful ones. Eleanor's response was interrupted by the arrival of their food, giving her a moment to collect her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was determined. James, there's something else you should know. Before I started investigating these complaints, I was looking into a series of suspicious real estate deals. Properties being bought and sold at unusual prices, permits granted despite clear violations. And, James prompted, sensing there was more. And several of those deals involved shell companies that I've now traced back to Sterling Legal Services. Elena pulled out her tablet, showing James a complex web of connections she'd mapped out. I think the attacks on your firm aren't just about an old grudge. I think Hassan's father might have known something that Sterling couldn't. Risk coming to light. James studied the diagram, his legal training helping him see the implications. These property deals, they all happened around the time Sterling left the firm, and look at the dates of the largest transactions. The week before Kamal al-Rashid had his accident, Elena finished. The accident that led him to hand control of the firm to Hassan earlier than planned. James sat back, his face pale. Elena, if you're suggesting what I think you are... I'm not suggesting anything yet, she interrupted, but we need to be careful, very careful, and we need to talk to Sarah again. If there's evidence of Sterling's involvement in these deals somewhere in those archives, she'll find it. As they finished their meal, neither noticed the man at the bar who'd been watching them intently. Nor did they see him slip out his phone to make a call. Within an hour, Marcus Sterling would know every detail of their conversation, thanks to the sophisticated listening device planted beneath their table days earlier. In his penthouse office across town, Sterling listened to the recording with growing concern. He'd spent 20 years building his empire on the ruins of his partnership with Kamal al-Rashid, carefully covering his tracks. Now, a homeless girl, with a knack for research, and a stubborn inspector were threatening to unravel everything. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Get me everything you can find on Sarah Mitchell, and I mean everything. If she's going to be a problem, I want to know exactly how to handle it. The pieces were moving faster now, the stakes rising with each new discovery. For Elena and James, their professional collaboration was blooming into something deeper, even as the dangers around them multiplied. For Sarah, her new position at Al-Rashid & Associates offered a chance at redemption, but also placed her squarely in Sterling's crosshairs. And for Hassan, watching it all unfold from his father's old office, the challenge wasn't just about saving his firm anymore. It was about finally understanding the truth behind his father's mysterious accident and the partner who had betrayed them all. Chapter 5. Rising Tides. The transformation of Sarah Mitchell over the next few weeks was remarkable to witness. Gone were the worn clothes and hesitant demeanor, replaced by professional attire and growing confidence. Hassan had arranged for her to have a small apartment near the office, but she still spent most of her time in the archives, diving deeper into the firm's history. One evening, as the Chicago skyline glittered beyond the windows, Sarah sat in her newly assigned office, surrounded by documents that told a story few had ever pieced together. Her laptop screen displayed a complex timeline she'd created, connecting seemingly unrelated events from 20 years ago. You should go home, get some rest, Hassan said from the doorway, his voice carrying both concern and admiration. Sarah looked up, her green eyes bright with excitement. "Hassan, I found something big." She gestured to her screen. "Remember those real estate deals Inspector Martinez mentioned? I traced them back further. Before Sterling left the firm, there was a series of international investments that don't make sense." Hassan moved closer, studying the timeline. "What do you mean?" "The firm was handling major real estate developments in Dubai, Singapore, and London. Huge projects, billions in investments." Sarah pulled up several documents, but the money flow? It's like watching a shell game. Funds would appear from one source, disappear, then reappear from somewhere else entirely. Hassan's expression darkened. "My father handled those deals personally with Sterling." "Exactly," Sarah said, pulling up more files. "And look at this. 3 weeks before Sterling left the firm, your father started an internal audit of all international transactions. The audit was never completed because of his accident," Hassan finished, his voice tight with emotion. He sat down heavily in a chair beside Sarah's desk. "I always wondered why Sterling left so suddenly. Father never talked about it even after he recovered." Sarah hesitated, then pulled out an old photograph she'd found in the archives. It showed Kamal al-Rashid and Marcus Sterling at a project launch in Dubai, both smiling, arms around each, others' shoulders like brothers. "They were close, weren't they?" "Like family," Hassan admitted. "Sterling was there when I took my first steps, attended every birthday party. After my mother passed, he helped father raise me." His eyes clouded with memories, which made his betrayal even worse. A knock at the door interrupted them. James Chen entered, his expression urgent. "Hassan, we have a problem. Watson Manufacturing just withdrew their ethics complaint against..." "Hers? Isn't that good news?" Sarah asked, confused by James's concern. "They withdrew it because they've been bought out," James explained, "by a subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. He's not just taking our clients anymore, he's buying them outright." Hassan stood, his face set with determination. "He's getting desperate. Sarah's discoveries must have him worried." He turned to Sarah. "How much more time do you need to compile all this evidence?" "A few days, maybe a week, to document everything properly," she replied. "But Hassan, there's something else. These property deals, the way the money moved. I think your father found evidence of..." The lights in the office suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in moments later, but when they checked Sarah's laptop, the screen was black. James quickly checked the network. "We've been hacked. The whole system is down." Hassan's phone rang. Elena Martinez. "The bureau system was just hit too," she reported. "Every file related to the Sterling investigation has been wiped clean." In his private study across town, Marcus Sterling poured himself a glass of scotch, studying old photographs spread across his desk. One showed him with young Hassan on his shoulders, both laughing at some forgotten joke. Another captured the moment Kamal had made him partner, their handshake sealed with genuine affection. "It had to be done," he murmured to the photographs. "All of it." He picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Is it finished?" "The data's been erased," his tech specialist confirmed. "But sir, we have another problem. Before the systems went down, someone uploaded a large encrypted file to a secure server. We can't trace where it went." Sterling's hand tightened around his glass. Sarah Mitchell had proven more resourceful than he'd anticipated. Perhaps it was time to try a different approach, one that would test Hassan's newfound faith in his protege. Back at Al-Rashid and Associates, Sarah worked frantically to restore what she could from backup drives, but a small smile played at her lips. Years of living on the streets had taught her never to keep all her resources in one place. The most damaging evidence was already safe, hidden where Sterling would never think to look. What no one realized was that the next morning would bring a visitor to the firm, someone from both Hassan's and Sterling's past, carrying secrets that would change everything they thought they knew about the night Kamal al-Rashid's accident, changed all their lives. Chapter 6. Echoes of Truth. The morning after the cyber attack, a distinguished elderly woman walked into Al-Rashid and Associates, her silver hair elegantly styled, her bearing regal despite her advanced years. The receptionist noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she asked to see Hassan al-Rashid. "Tell him Diana Bennett is here," she said softly. "He'll want to see me." In his office, Hassan was in the middle of a crisis meeting with Elena, James and Sarah when his assistant interrupted with the news. The color drained from his face at the mention of the name. "Diana Bennett?" Elena asked, noting Hassan's reaction. "Who is she?" "My father's former secretary," Hassan replied, standing quickly. "And Marcus Sterling's ex-wife. She disappeared. Right after father's accident. No one's heard from her in 20 years. Sarah's research instincts kicked in. Diana Bennett? Her name appears in several documents from that period, but after the accident it's like she vanished from the record." Hassan straightened his tie, his movements betraying his nervousness. "She didn't just vanish from the records. She vanished. From Chicago completely. Father tried to find her for years. When Diana entered the office, her eyes immediately went to the portrait of Kamal al-Rashid on the wall. He always hated that painting," she said with a sad smile. "Said it made him look too serious." Hassan gestured for everyone to sit, but Diana remained standing, her attention now focused on Sarah. "So you're the one who's been digging through the old files, finding all those breadcrumbs I left behind." The room fell silent. Sarah leaned forward. "You left clues deliberately." Diana nodded, finally taking a seat. "I've spent 20 years waiting for someone clever enough to put it all together. When I heard about your discoveries, I knew it was time to come forward." She reached into her handbag, withdrawing a small leather-bound notebook. "Kamal gave me this the day before his accident. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure Hassan got it." She placed it on Hassan's desk. "I was a coward. I ran instead." Hassan picked up the notebook with trembling hands. Inside, in his father's precise handwriting, were detailed notes about the international real estate deals, and something far worse. "Marcus was laundering money," Diana continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "Using the firm's international projects to clean billions for some very dangerous people. Kamal discovered it during the audit. He confronted Marcus, told him they had to report it. The accident," Hassan said, his voice hollow. "It wasn't an accident at all, was it?" Diana's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus found out Kamal was planning to go to the authorities. He arranged for the brake lines in Kamal's car to be tampered with. I overheard him on the phone, but by then it was too late to warn Kamal." Elena was taking notes rapidly. "Mrs. Bennett, would you be willing to make an official statement?" "That's why I'm here," Diana replied. "I'm dying, you see. Cancer. I can't take these secrets to my grave." Hassan gripped the edge of his desk, memories of that terrible night flooding back. His father had survived, but the injuries had forced him to step back from the firm, handing control to Hassan years before he'd planned to. "Why now?" James asked. "After all these years?" Diana looked at Sarah. "Because finally, someone was asking the right questions, looking in the right places." She turned to Hassan. "Your father protected Marcus for years, tried to help him stay clean. Even after the accident, he never told anyone what he'd discovered. He valued loyalty too much." Sarah's mind was racing. The recent attacks on the firm, the stolen clients, the ethical complaints. It's all about keeping us distracted, isn't it? Making sure we're too busy fighting fires to look too closely at the past. "And now he's getting sloppy," Eleanor added. "The property deals I've been investigating. He's still doing it, isn't he, Mrs. Bennett? Still using real estate to clean money?" Diana nodded. "Old habits die hard, but he's desperate now." When Sarah started connecting the old cases to the new ones, Hassan stood abruptly, moving to the window. The morning sun caught the tears in his eyes. "All these years, I thought he left because of some business disagreement. Father never told me the truth, never told me what Sterling had done. He wanted to protect you," Diana said gently. "Both from the truth and from Marcus. He knew what Marcus was capable of." The notebook in Hassan's hands suddenly felt heavier than ever. Within its pages lay the proof of not just financial crimes, but of a betrayal so deep it had nearly destroyed 2 families. The question now was how to use this information without putting everyone in even greater danger. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, Marcus Sterling was reviewing security footage from the lobby, watching his ex-wife walk back into their lives carrying the very evidence he'd spent 2 decades trying to bury. Chapter 7. Breaking Points. Marcus Sterling stood in his penthouse office, Chicago's skyline stretching endlessly behind him as he processed the news of Diana's reappearance. The glass of scotch in his hand trembled slightly, the first visible crack in his carefully maintained composure. "Find her," he barked into his phone. "I don't care how. Just—" He stopped abruptly as his assistant entered with an urgent message. The color drained from his face as he read it. Meanwhile, at Al-Rashid and Associates, Eleanor and James worked late into the night, reviewing Diana's evidence with a team of trusted associates. The conference room had become a war room, its walls covered with timelines and connection charts that Sarah had meticulously created. "Look at this," Eleanor said, pointing to a series of transactions. "The pattern matches perfectly with the current real estate deals I've been investigating. He never changed his methods, just the shell companies he used." James moved closer, his shoulder brushing against hers. The contact was brief but electric, a moment of connection in the midst of chaos. "Elena," he said softly, "we need to talk about what happens next. Once we take this public, Sterling will—" "I know," she interrupted, her voice tight with concern. "But we can't back down now. Diana's testimony changes everything." In his office, Hassan sat with Diana, both nursing cups of tea that had long gone cold. "Why didn't he tell me?" Hassan asked, his voice heavy with 2 decades of questions. "All these years I thought Sterling left because of some dispute over clients." Diana set down her cup, her hands steady despite the weight of her revelations. "Your father believed in redemption, Hassan. Even after everything, he hoped Marcus would change. That's why he kept the evidence but never used it. And now?" Hassan gestured to the chaos around them. "What would he think of all this?" "He would be proud," a new voice said from the doorway. Sarah stood there holding a stack of freshly printed documents. "Proud that you're finally fighting back." Hassan smiled weakly. "Sarah, you should go home. Get some rest." "Actually," she said, moving into the office, "I think I've found something else. Something big." She spread the documents across Hassan's desk. "These aren't just random property deals. Look at the pattern. Sterling's been building something. A network of properties and businesses, all connected through layers of shell companies, but when you map it out—" Diana leaned forward, her eyes widening. "It's a mirror image of what Kamal built. He's been recreating the Al-Rashid empire, but corrupted, using it to hide dirty money." The revelation hung heavy in the air, interrupted by a commotion from the outer office. James burst in, his face flushed with urgency. "Hassan, turn on the news now." The wall-mounted TV flickered to life, showing Marcus Sterling at a press conference. His expression was grave, his voice steady as he delivered a bombshell. "It pains me to reveal that Al-Rashid and Associates, a firm I once proudly called home, has been involved in a systematic pattern of evidence tampering and client fraud. I have submitted comprehensive evidence to the State Bar Association and federal authorities." Hassan's phone immediately began buzzing with calls from panicked clients. But it was Sarah who noticed something odd about Sterling's appearance. "Look at his hands," she whispered. "They're shaking. He's terrified." Elena was already on her phone, calling contacts at various agencies. James paced the room, his legal mind racing through possibilities. "He's trying to get ahead of the story. If he can discredit us before we go public with Diana's evidence—" "It won't work," Hassan said firmly, standing up. "Father kept copies of everything. The notebook, the transaction records, all of it. In the one place Sterling would never think to look." Diana's eyes lit up with recognition. "The old family vault in Dubai." "Exactly," Hassan replied. "And I think it's time we opened it." He turned to his team. "James, I need you and Elena to keep working with the evidence we have here. Sarah, your research skills might be crucial in Dubai. Would you be willing to come with me?" Before Sarah could respond, a security alert blared through the building. On the security monitors, they watched as federal agents swarmed the lobby, brandishing search warrants. "Well," Diana said calmly, picking up her teacup, "it seems Marcus has made his move. Time to show him what the Al-Rashid family does when backed into a corner." What none of them realized was that Sterling's press conference was just the beginning. In his office, He was already implementing the next phase of his plan, one that would force Hassan to choose between saving his firm and protecting the people he'd grown to care about. Chapter 8. Matters of the Heart. While federal agents combed through the offices of Al-Rashid and Associates, Elena and James found themselves in the quiet sanctuary of the Blue Door Cafe, their usual table offering a momentary escape from the chaos. The coffee had grown cold between them, forgotten in the intensity of their conversation. "You can't go to Dubai," Elena said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "It's too dangerous. Sterling will be watching every move." James reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Hassan needs someone he can trust to handle things here, and you need backup while you work with Diana's evidence." The touch lingered, neither pulling away. The past weeks of working together, of shared dangers and discoveries, had built something neither had expected. Elena looked up, meeting his eyes. "James, I know," he interrupted softly. "Me too." The moment was broken by Elena's phone buzzing, a text from her supervisor demanding an immediate meeting. She showed it to James, her expression troubled. "They're going to try to shut down my investigation. Sterling's press conference gives them the perfect excuse." "Then we don't let them," James said firmly. "The evidence Diana brought us, combined with your property investigation, it's too solid to ignore." At that moment across town, Sarah sat in her small apartment packing for Dubai. The space, though modest, represented more stability than she'd known in years. Her fingers traced the spines of law books Hassan had given her, each one a step toward reclaiming the future she'd thought lost forever. A knock at her door made her freeze. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery man holding a package. When she opened the door, she found a small box with no return address. Inside was a worn student ID card, her own from the law school she'd had to leave 3 years ago, along with a note. "Some secrets should stay buried. Walk away now." Her hands shaking, Sarah called Hassan. "Someone knows about my past," she said without preamble. "About why I ended up on the streets. Are you all right?" Hassan's voice was thick with concern. "I can send security—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "I'm fine. But Hassan, there's something you should know. About why I left law school." She took a deep breath. "I discovered irregularities in the school's scholarship foundation. When I reported it, I found out it was connected to some very powerful people. Next thing I knew, my scholarship was revoked, my student loans were called in, and every law firm in Chicago blacklisted me." The line was quiet for a moment. "Let me guess," Hassan finally said. "The foundation was connected to Sterling Legal Services." "Yes," Sarah replied. "That's why your father's records looked so familiar. The money laundering patterns. They were the same ones I'd found before." Back at the bureau, Eleanor stood her ground before her supervisor, her evidence spread across his desk. "Sir, with all due respect, Sterling's press conference is a desperate attempt to discredit legitimate evidence of criminal activity. Evidence brought by his ex-wife, who's been missing for 20 years, Director Thompson scoffed. "It'll never hold up." "The property records will," Elena countered, "and the international transactions. Sir, this goes beyond a rivalry between law firms. We're talking about billions in laundered money." Thompson's expression hardened. "This investigation is closed, Inspector. That's an order." Eleanor straightened, removing her badge and placing it on his desk. "Then consider this my resignation." Meanwhile, in his office, Hassan received an unexpected visitor, Marcus Sterling himself. The older man looked smaller somehow, less imposing than Hassan remembered from his childhood. "You always were like a son to me," Sterling said without preamble. "More than my own children ever were. That's why I'm here, to give you one chance to stop this before it goes too far." Hassan's response was cut short by his phone buzzing with an urgent message from James. Elena had resigned, Sarah's past had been exposed, and somewhere in Dubai, a vault containing 20 years of secrets waited to either save or destroy them all. Sterling watched Hassan read the messages, a sad smile playing at his lips. "You see, I built this city, Hassan. Built it on relationships and favors and carefully kept secrets. How many more lives are you willing to sacrifice to protect your father's legacy? What Sterling didn't realize was that his very presence in the office was being recorded, every word captured by the security systems Sarah had quietly upgraded weeks ago. And in the Blue Door Cafe, James was already working on a plan that would turn Sterling's own tactics against him. A plan that required not just legal brilliance, but the kind of street-smart instincts that only someone like Sarah could provide. Chapter 9. Desert Winds. The Dubai skyline stretched before Hassan and Sarah like a forest of glass and steel, its modern towers a stark contrast to the traditional architecture of the old city. They stood in the lobby of Al Rashid Tower, a building Hassan's father had constructed 20 years ago as the centerpiece of his international expansion. The vault's in the basement, Hassan explained, leading Sarah through a series of security checkpoints. Father believed in keeping the most important things close to home, even when home was thousands of miles away. Sarah noticed how the local staff treated Hassan with a mixture of respect and genuine affection. "You spent time here as a child?" "Every summer," Hassan replied, a fond smile crossing his face. Father believed in understanding different cultures, different ways of thinking. Sterling never approved, said we should focus on Chicago. They reached a heavy door marked with traditional Arabic calligraphy. Hassan pressed his palm to a scanner, then entered a complex code. Father changed all the security protocols after his accident. Sterling's access was revoked, but he never knew about this place. The vault door swung open silently, revealing not just a room of safety deposit boxes, but a fully equipped office. Father's private workspace, Hassan explained, where he kept his most sensitive files. Back in Chicago, James sat in his apartment, surrounded by documents. His phone was connected to a secure line with Elena, who was working from a safe house Diana had arranged. "Sterling's getting careless," Eleanor reported. "After his visit to Hassan, he made 3 calls to known associates. We've got recordings of all of them." "And Sarah's security upgrades caught everything from his office visit," James added. "But we need more. The Dubai records could be the key to—" He was interrupted by an urgent message from one of his contacts at the State Bar Association. "Elena, Sterling just filed an emergency motion to have Al Rashid and Associates placed under receivership. He's claiming evidence of widespread financial misconduct. He's trying to seize control of the firm before Hassan can access the Dubai records," Elena realized. "How long do we have?" "The hearing's set for tomorrow morning," James replied, his mind racing. "We need those records now." In Dubai, Sarah moved methodically through the files in Kamal's office, while Hassan accessed the vault itself. Her trained eye caught patterns in the organization system that others might have missed. "Hassan," she called out suddenly, "these aren't just transaction records. Your father was building a case. Look at how everything's cross-referenced, documented." Hassan joined her, examining the meticulous files. He was preparing for exactly this situation, making sure that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. Sarah's fingers traced a series of notations in the margins. "These match the patterns I found in the Scholarship Foundation case. Hassan, your father wasn't just tracking Sterling's crimes. He was mapping out the entire network, everyone involved, every transaction, every shell company." Their discovery was interrupted by Hassan's phone ringing. James with news of Sterling's legal maneuver. "We need to get these records back to Chicago before the hearing," Hassan said, quickly beginning to photograph crucial documents. "Wait," Sarah said, studying a particular file more closely. "This is interesting. According to these notes, Sterling didn't just betray your father. He betrayed his own partners in the money laundering scheme. He was skimming millions, using the Al Rashid firm's reputation to cover his tracks." Hassan's eyes widened as he realized the implications. "That's why he's been so desperate to destroy our reputation. If his other partners ever discovered—" Sarah was already pulling out more files. "Your father knew he was gathering evidence not just against Sterling, but to protect the firm from his partner's inevitable retaliation." In Chicago, Sterling sat in his office, watching the sun set over the city he'd helped build. His phone buzzed with a message. His sources confirmed Hassan and Sarah had accessed the Dubai vault. He poured himself a drink, his hand steady despite the news. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, James was implementing the next phase of their plan. Using his contacts in the legal community, he began quietly reaching out to Sterling's legitimate clients, sharing carefully selected pieces of evidence that suggested their own businesses might be compromised. Elena, working with Diana, started feeding specific information to carefully chosen investigative reporters. The story they were building wasn't just about Sterling's betrayal of the Al-Rashids. It was about how he'd compromised the entire Chicago legal community. As Hassan and Sarah carefully packed the most crucial evidence for their return to Chicago, neither noticed the figure watching them from across the street, speaking quietly into a phone. Sterling's network was vast, and his desperation was growing. The race wasn't just to get the evidence back to Chicago, it was to get it there before Sterling's increasingly unstable partners decided to take matters into their own hands. Chapter 10. Turning Tides. The morning of the receivership hearing dawned cold and clear in Chicago. James stood before the State Bar Association's emergency panel, his preparation evident in every carefully chosen word. Elena sat in the gallery, watching as he masterfully laid out their case. The allegations against Al-Rashid and associates are not just false, James argued, his voice steady and confident. They are a deliberate attempt to conceal decades of financial misconduct by Marcus Sterling and his associates. Sterling's lawyers objected immediately, but James was ready. If the panel will allow, I have evidence that Mr. Sterling has been using both his own firm and his attacks on Al-Rashid and associates to cover up a massive money laundering operation. In the back of the room, Diana Bennett sat quietly, her presence a silent reminder of the past's long shadow. She watched as Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual composure cracking slightly. Meanwhile, Hassan and Sarah were racing, back from Dubai, their precious cargo of documents secured in diplomatic pouches arranged through Hassan's international contacts. During the long flight, Sarah continued analyzing the files, finding new connections that strengthened their case. "Your father wasn't just thorough," she told Hassan, showing him another set of cross-referenced documents. "He was brilliant. He created a fail-safe that would only make sense when all the pieces came together." Hassan studied the papers, seeing his father's wisdom with new eyes. He knew someday someone would need to understand the whole picture, someone with the right kind of mind to see the patterns. Sarah smiled slightly. Someone like a homeless law student who'd already uncovered part of Sterling's scheme? "Maybe he knew more than we thought," Hassan replied thoughtfully. "Diana said he never gave up hope that the truth would come out." Back in the hearing room, James was building to his crucial point when his phone buzzed with a message from Elena. Hassan and Sarah had landed. The documents were on their way. "Before we proceed further," James announced, "I'd like to request a brief recess. Additional evidence is being delivered that directly pertains to these matters." Sterling's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is clearly a delay tactic. The panel should proceed with the receivership order immediately." But the head of the panel, intrigued by James's presentation, granted the recess. As the room cleared, Elena joined James in a quiet corner. "Hassan and Sarah are 15 minutes away," she whispered. "But we've got another problem. 3 of Sterling's international partners just arrived in Chicago. My sources say they're not happy about the attention he's brought to their operations." James loosened his tie slightly. "We need to finish this before they decide to handle things their own way. If they move against Sterling, it could expose everything before we're ready," Elena finished, "and put everyone in danger." Across town, Sterling received an urgent message from his security team. His partners had bypassed his office and were heading straight for the hearing. He quickly made several calls, trying to contain the situation, but for the first time in decades, events were spinning beyond his control. Sarah and Hassan arrived at the courthouse with minutes to spare. As they rushed through security, Sarah noticed something in one of the documents she'd been reviewing on the flight. "Hassan, look at this," she said, pointing to a series of transactions. "Your father didn't just document Sterling's crimes. He created a way to protect the legitimate clients and investments from being tainted by Sterling's schemes. He built a firewall between the clean and dirty money." Hassan's eyes lit up with understanding. So when Sterling's partners realized he betrayed them, Their retaliation can't touch the innocent clients or the Al Rashid firm's legitimate operations, Sarah finished. Your father protected everyone he could, even after he knew what Sterling had done. They entered the hearing room just as James was about to resume his presentation. Sterling's face went pale at the sight of the diplomatic pouches Sarah carried. But before James could present the new evidence, the hearing room doors burst open. 3 men in expensive suits entered, their expressions hard as they looked at Sterling. The head of the panel called for order as tension filled the room. In that moment, Sterling made a decision that would change everything. He stood, straightening his tie one last time. "I request permission to address the panel," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of secrets. "There are some things I need to say." Diana Bennett leaned forward in her seat, tears in her eyes as she watched the man she had once loved finally face the consequences of his choices. Hassan gripped Sarah's hand tightly, feeling the weight of his father's legacy in the documents they carried. The panel chairman nodded, and Marcus Sterling began to speak, unaware that his next words would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the Chicago legal community forever. Chapter 11. The Weight of Truth. The hearing room fell into absolute silence as Marcus Sterling stood before the panel. For a moment, he looked at the faces around him. Hassan, whom he'd watched grow from a child into the man his father had hoped he'd be. Diana, the woman who'd loved him enough to flee rather than watch his descent into corruption. Sarah, the brilliant young woman whose life he'd nearly destroyed to protect his secrets. 20 years ago, Sterling began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it, I made a choice that forever altered the lives of everyone in this room. Kamal al-Rashid was more than my partner. He was my brother in everything but blood, and I betrayed him. Hassan felt Sarah's hand tighten around his as Sterling continued. The international real estate projects we developed were legitimate at first, but I saw an opportunity to make more money, to build something bigger than what Kamal envisioned. I began using our firm's reputation to facilitate transactions for people who needed to hide their money. Sterling turned to face Hassan directly. Your father discovered what I was doing. He didn't go to the authorities immediately. Instead, he came to me, offered to help me make it right. But I was too far in, too proud to admit I'd lost my way. Diana wiped tears from her eyes as Sterling described the night of Kamal's accident. I didn't order the brake lines cut. That was done without my knowledge by partners who thought I couldn't handle the situation. But I knew it was going to happen, and I did nothing to stop it. That's a weight I've carried every day since. James stood, legal pad in hand. Mr. Sterling, are you officially confessing to participation in money laundering and conspiracy to conceal financial crimes? I'm confessing to everything, Sterling replied, looking at his former partners in the back of the room. Every transaction, every shell company, every client who used our services to hide illegal funds. It's all documented in those files from Dubai, files Kamal created not just to expose the truth, but to protect the innocent people caught in the middle. Sarah stepped forward, pulling out specific documents. The evidence shows that Mr. Sterling also diverted millions from his criminal partners, using the confusion of international transactions to skim from their deposits. Sterling's partners rose from their seats, but federal agents who had been quietly stationed around the room moved to block their exit. Elena had ensured that the right authorities were in place for this moment. I've spent 20 years trying to bury what I did, Sterling continued, his composure finally cracking. Attacking the Al Rashid firm, trying to destroy its reputation before anyone could look too closely at the past. But Kamal... His voice broke slightly. Kamal knew this day would come. That's why he left those records, why he created that failsafe, to protect the legitimate clients. The panel chairman leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, you understand that this confession will result in your immediate disbarment and criminal charges. I understand, Sterling replied, but there's one more thing that needs to be said. He turned to Sarah. 3 years ago, when you discovered the irregularities in the Scholarship Foundation, you weren't just a random student who stumbled onto something suspicious. Kamal had arranged that scholarship specifically for students with your kind of analytical mind. He was still looking for someone who could unravel what I'd done, even after he stepped back from the firm. Hassan looked at Sarah with new understanding. His father's foresight had extended far beyond what any of them had imagined. Even from the past, Kamal al-Rashid had been laying the groundwork for justice. As federal agents moved to take Sterling and his partners into custody, Diana approached, her ex-husband. "Was any of it real?" she asked softly. "What we had?" Sterling's eyes filled with tears. "It was the only real thing in my life. That's why I let you run. You were the one good thing I couldn't corrupt." The panel quickly ruled against the receivership motion, but that was now the least significant event of the day. As reporters rushed to file their stories, and federal agents began their formal investigation, Hassan gathered his team in his father's old office. What none of them realized was that Kamal al-Rashid had left one final surprise in those Dubai records, a revelation that would ensure his legacy lived on in ways none of them could have anticipated. Chapter 12. Legacy of Hope. 1 month after. Sterling's confession, the Al-Rashid and Associates office buzzed with renewed energy. The firm had not only survived the crisis, but emerged stronger, its reputation enhanced by the revelation of how Kamal al-Rashid had worked to protect legitimate clients from Sterling's schemes. Hassan sat in his father's office, now his own, reviewing the final piece of evidence Sarah had discovered in the Dubai files, a letter his father had written years ago, meant to be found only when all the other pieces were in place. "My dear Hassan," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then someone has finally unraveled the web Sterling wove. I pray you understand why I kept these secrets, why I built these safeguards instead of exposing everything immediately. Some truths need time to emerge, need the right people to bring them into the light." The letter went on to outline Kamal's vision for the firm's future, not just as a successful legal practice, but as a force for positive change in the Chicago legal community. He had established a foundation, hidden within the legitimate side, of the business, dedicated to supporting ethical legal education and practice. The scholarship program that brought Sarah to our attention wasn't random, Hassan explained to the group gathered in his office. Father had set up dozens of similar programs, all designed to identify and support students who showed particular talent for understanding complex financial and legal patterns. Sarah, now officially the firm's head of compliance and investigations, smiled at the elegance of Kamal's plan. He was building a network of ethical lawyers and investigators, people who would eventually be in positions to prevent something like Sterling's scheme from happening again. Eleanor, who had been reinstated at the bureau with a promotion after the Sterling investigation, squeezed James's hand. "Your father was playing a very long game, Hassan, and it worked perfectly." James nodded, looking around at the group. "The firm's legitimate clients have all stayed, and we've actually gained new business from companies impressed by how the Al-Rashid safeguards protected innocent parties from Sterling's crimes." Diana, who had decided to stay in Chicago, added, "Kamal always said that true justice requires patience, wisdom, and faith in people's capacity for good." Hassan stood, moving to the window where he could see the Chicago skyline. Father's letter had one final request, that we continue his work, not just as lawyers, but as guardians of what the law should truly represent. He turned back to the group. "Sarah, Eleanor, James, you're all proof that he was right, that sometimes the right people find each other exactly when they're needed." Post? Elena and James exchanged a meaningful look. They had recently announced their engagement, their relationship deepened by the challenges they'd faced together. Sarah beamed at them, her own happiness evident in how far she'd come from that cold night when Hassan had first offered her shelter. "The foundation Father established," Hassan continued, "needs a board of directors, people who understand both the letter and the spirit of the law, people who've proven their commitment to justice." He looked at each person in the room. "I can't think of anyone better qualified." Diana wiped away a tear. "Kamal would be so proud, not just of the truth coming out, but of how you all fought for it, how you protected each other and the principles he believed in." As the group discussed plans for the foundation's future, Hassan noticed Sarah looking thoughtfully at Kamal's portrait. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just thinking," she replied. "That first night, when you found me in the doorway, it wasn't really chance, was it?" "Diana mentioned I'd been staying near places connected to the old scholarship foundation," Hassan smiled. "Father always said there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to justice. The right people find their way to where they're needed." The sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows through the office windows. In a prison meeting room across town, Marcus Sterling was cooperating with federal investigators, working to make what amends he could. Diana had visited him once, offering, if not forgiveness, at least understanding. The Al-Rashid firm had emerged from its greatest crisis stronger than ever, guided by a new generation committed to the principles Kamal had fought to protect. Sarah's journey from the streets to the boardroom had inspired Hassan to establish a pro bono program specifically focused on helping people rebuild their lives. Elena and James were planning a small wedding, with Hassan set to be best man and Sarah the maid of honor. As Hassan looked at his father's letter one final time before locking it away, he smiled at the last lines. "Remember, my son, that true legacy isn't measured in money or power, but in the lives we touch and the changes we inspire. Every end is just a new beginning." In the gathering dusk, the lights of Al-Rashid and Associates shone bright against the Chicago sky, a beacon of hope and justice, just as Kamal had always intended it to be.